made it after all. Wretched weather, too. You had a safe trip, I assume, over the moors and so on and so forth?
Me? Oh, I'm fine, Mr. Sims, just fine. No trouble at all, sir.
Good. Well, as you can see, you've got your work cut out for you. We've been in dire need of an archivist for about 7 years, and what with the seasonals to plant and the renovation of the left wing, it collapsed, during the incident. Need I say more?
This is the library, then?
Yes, indeed. Quite a collection it is, too. All these volumes you see around you here have been here for half a century. Now, Flood, look deeply into my eyes.
Okay.
Now look at that portrait on the wall. Notice the resemblance? Granted, it's marginal, but notice the vestigial beauty mark on the left cheek. That, of course, is my distinguished ancestor, Leopold von Sims, the von being the hereditary title awarded our family during the Reign of Terror. After the 9th Thermidor, the title was restored, and Leopold there was the first to assume it. After him, there was Reginald, unjustly accused, if you remember your history books, of murdering 100 small children after viciously raping and subjecting them to hideously arcane tortures. Load of house will, needless to say, I'm sure.
And then?
And then what? Look, Fletcher, why don't you just get right down to brass tacks? We need everything catalogued. Where you're standing now is soon to become an historical museum. After I die, and I suppose I ought to tell you, that day is not far off yet, in my heart. The doctors say it should come at any moment.
I'm sorry.
The property reverts to the nation.
Sims, I am sorry to hear that.
Could be worse, Flood. Don't look so surprised. I've had a long life. Do you hear that? There are things worse than death.
Sounds like a dog.
It is a dog. Well, I'll leave you to your work. Mrs. Duffy will be finished upstairs any minute now. She'll show you your sweet.
You must be...
I'm Flood. I'm the new...
I know all about it. I suppose you're not even slightly curious to know what happened to the old one.
And you're...
Rupert.
Rupert Sims.
Hardly. What a lot of books you got here. Regular Library of Congress.
Yes, the Sims family certainly is historical.
Oh, terribly so. They go way back.
I read somewhere they go back to the Norman Conquest.
That's probably true. You wouldn't be the first to point that out to me.
Do you, are you...
Spit it out, Flood. I only came down for a cigarette. I haven't got all day.
Well, who are you?
I told you.
Is this some kind of game?
Your predecessor achieved quite a lot of notoriety by accident, of course.
I'm afraid I'm in the dark.
If you aren't now, you will be soon. Did the dogs bark while you were down here with Sims?
I don't know if I should answer that.
Did you smoke?
They're non-filtered.
No thanks. Another time. See you around.
Mr. Flood. I'm Mrs. Duffy, and I know you must be exhausted. Now, I've had the gardener take your luggage upstairs, and everything's going to be just fine. I'm awfully gratified to see a new face around here. Gets gloomy at nightfall, those vapors rising off the heath, etc., etc. And how's your pudendum?
My what?
Oh, just a little joke. We try to keep a sense of humor in these lugubrious surroundings. Did I get you anything? Hashish?
I thought I'd make a stab at these archives.
That word. Well, they're hardly what you can call a decent archive. That's the singular, can you? That previous historian only worked himself up to the 14th century, if I remember correctly. Frederick von Sims, the hereditary Duke of Granma.
Mrs. Duffy?
What?
What exactly happened to the last archivist?
You don't know?
Well, I wouldn't ask.
And here I thought you were all prepared. Do you hear that? Out on the moors.
No, I don't.
Well, perhaps they're not up and about yet. They prefer to commence their god-awful howling about 2 a.m. And a real blood-curdling sound it is, I can tell you. Well, I've had my midnight movie interrupted many a time.
You trying to tell me something?
Not necessarily. But on the other hand, I believe in being friendly. If I am trying to tell you something, I'm sure I'm not aware of it.
But all these hints, these insinuations, it's unnerving.
Are you all right?
My head. Can you feel it?
Oh, it's the barometric pressure, I'll bet. Awful in these parts. Now, how about a nice plate of inedible sandwiches? Or are you a meat eater?
I'm fairly carnivorous, but whatever you have.
Well, I could manage some tea, if you care for tea. Always gives me fantastic diarrhea. Well, good luck with your researches. I'll be out in the scullery if you need anything. Oh, and, Flood.
Yeah?
Don't ask quite so many questions. Curiosity killed the cat, and so on.
Now, you listen to me. I'm getting a little fed up. Do you know what I mean? That vase you put the jonquils in, it's round. You need a square vase for those jonquils. And that's not all. I'm going to tell you what else I don't appreciate, and I want you to listen carefully. When Richard was here with his new friend, the bodybuilder, I saw the way you devoured him. You gaped at him when he was downstairs in his underwear. The person who gets the wrong idea. I know I can.
Rupert, you make a mountain out of a hill of beans.
That may be true. And what about those jonquils?
The hell with the jonquils! Have we not more important things to discuss?
Such as?
Such as you are giving me a headache!
That may be true. And perhaps you deserve one.
Can't we stop torturing each other?
Not as long as you've got that little tart working down in the library.
I've seen the way he looks at you with those huge, limpid eyes, like some cow in heat. And you, the same thing exactly.
Rupert, you are sick in your mind. I wonder if you know that.
It isn't me who can't restrain myself.
What are you implying? As if I do.
As if you didn't know. Last night, out there, on the heath. It's in the Morning Gazette, page 1, right next to Mrs. McFadden's recipe for plum pickle jelly.
You are allowing your imagination to play games with yourself, I really do believe. Now, I refuse to utter one more word on that subject, and I would appreciate it if you would refrain likewise, because don't forget, Rupert, the sword cuts both ways.
It's about time you admit it.
Flood, how are the old archives?
Well, I managed to make some headway here with your ancestor Fromage II, Vice Regent of Queen's College on the Hippodrome. It seems Fromage
Means cheese in French, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say next.
I anticipated you. I have a habit of doing that.
If you don't care, Mr. Sims, I'd like to take a few hours off this afternoon and tread around the village. It's grotesque there. I'd like to take in a bit of the countryside.
Say no more. I'll have Mrs. Duffy pack you a nice lunch. Don't get too familiar.
Probably has the trots from all that foul water we've been getting in our tea lately.
Nothing like an attack of tourista to liven things up.
Oh, the poor man. He must be bored stiff without those musty old volumes to thumb through day in and day out. Unless you've been giving him a toss lately, Mrs. Duffy.
Well, you are a caution, Rupert. But kindly keep your lurid suggestions to yourself.
Well,
Unless they regard me directly.
what about enough chit-chat for one appallingly dismal afternoon? I hope Flood doesn't catch a croup mucking about out there on the heath.
But Mr. Sims, he's gone to the village for the cranberry contest.
The village, my eye. Flood's a curious one. He's out there pulling up my radishes to determine the nature of this strange nocturnal howling. Well, maybe you'll figure it out. Time for my nap.
Did you notice, Mrs. Duffy?
I hardly ever notice anything, Rupert.
Mr. Sims around the eyes?
Line.
No, dummy. Whiskers.
Oh, don't start in again, please, with that insane rumor, Rupert. Honestly, sometimes think you have something against poor Mr. Sims.
And the hairline is slipping. And notice how bushy she's getting around the eyebrows and the temples. There's something relatively canine about it, if you ask me.
Well, I didn't ask you. And I sincerely wish you would shut up about it. This campaign of innuendo against Mr. Sims is unbecoming to you, Rupert. You should get out more. Take some exercise.
I wouldn't step foot on that heath after 10 p.m., I can tell you that.
From the constabulary. And who am I talking to?
I'm Flood, the archivist.
Archivist? What's that? Some kind of homosexual?
No, I'm here putting the Von Sims family documents in order.
Are they leaving town?
No, Mr. Sims is expecting to kick off soon and wants to leave a tidy mansion for the government.
Well, as long as he's not skipping off. Before we saw this wave of nauseating homicides that's been sweeping the village.
Surely you don't think Mr. Sims has anything to do with that? What wave of homicide?
You must be new in town.
I just got here the other day. I'm already a source of domestic contention.
You make yourself right at home.
I do my best.
Well, Flood, notice anything a bit off about Mrs. Sims?
How do you mean off?
You know, peculiar.
If you ask me, it's that Rupert that's a bit peculiar.
Rupert? Oh, yes, the secretary of Mrs. Sims. No, he's clean. In fact, it's Rupert himself who first suggested we check out some of Mr. Sims' more private activities.
What base ingratitude!
He's done us a favor.
By informing on his old man? Hardly admirable.
You're right, Flood. It's rather base. But don't forget, in police work, we rely on the scum of the earth to help us persecute the criminal element. It would take us years to solve some of the disgusting crimes committed in this area if it weren't for stool pigeons like Rupert.
But you're barking up the wrong tree as far as Mr. Sims is concerned. He's practically senile. Hardly up for these killings you so far failed to describe.
A deliberate oversight on my part, Flood. I wouldn't want you to lose your lunch all of a sudden. I just had this outfit dry clean.
The killings were grisly?
Grisly? Oh, crackers! Way beyond what I would describe as grisly. No, the word for these homicides would be gut-wrenching or bestial. Grisly just doesn't even begin to describe it from my own point of view. You're a rather attractive man, Floyd.
Why, thank you, Inspector.
Do you, go out much at night?
Well, really, there's no place to go around here.
Why not come down to the Whore of Dorset Inn for a pint some evening? Lots of excitement. Dartboard. A barmaid with tits that just won't quit. All the booze you can get down without vomiting. And some occasional loose action in the men's room. You'd be right at home.
Well, thank you, Inspector. I might enjoy that. It would make for a change, anyway.
I'm sure it would, Flo. And if you do happen to observe anything, any sort of odd metamorphosis on the part of anyone connected with this household here, up to and including our Mr. Sims, you will let me know, would you? Your own safety might also be involved, you know. Not just those hapless girls out there on the heath with their faces torn away and their throats ripped apart as if attacked by some savage. Well, you get the idea.
There's something we've been meaning to tell you.
Well?
Flood, are you discreet?
How do you mean that?
can you keep a secret? I mean, I'm sure you could, but would you if someone told you a secret?
Of course, Rupert. I had no reason not to.
If it were a question of the authorities.
Authorities?
You know, snooping around, sticking their noses in.
In what? For the love of God, Rupert, you are sometimes more elliptical for me to make bloody head or tail out of what you're talking about.
Very well, I'll come right to the point. You've been here long enough to notice that something strange is going on in this house.
Well, you could put it that way.
What exactly have you noticed?
Well, you and Sims.
What about me and Sims?
Your relationship.
Good God, man, what are you implying?
It's obvious to me.
So you know about Sims and me?
Nothing to be ashamed of. I'm a bit that way myself.
Oh, you don't know what you're saying.
Rupert, I have seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him.
Who cares how he looks at me or how I look at him? You're missing the whole bloody point of the thing with that theory. Have you noticed, for example, how hairy Sims is?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I said, have you noticed how hairy Sims is? Yes or no, and then I'll tell you what I'm getting.
All right, yes, but it's not something I'd bring up at luncheon or anything. Many men are hirsute.
But wouldn't you say, Flood, in all candor, that Mr. Sims is considerably more hirsute than even the most hirsute individual you've run across in your recent memory?
Not really. I've seen people who have struck me as quite a bit more hirsute than Mr. Sims.
Flood, you are a historian of sorts, so you must be aware that in these ancient families, well, there's often a lot of inbreeding.
You mean incest? The Habsburgs had these funny lips, and the Hohenzollerns had little tails.
Flood, there are worse consequences to this sort of thing than funny lips and little tails. I think you'll go along with me that far.
Roper! What the hell have you done with thy eschatos, pencils? You know they keep my heart going, yet you pop them despite the frequency of Dr. Mapplethorpe's consultations is beyond anything.
Narcolepsy, Flood. He would sleep perpetually if it weren't for those pills.
Roper!
And that, Flood, would be most dangerous. Something rather odd. I think someone even as dense as yourself would characterize as rather odd. The change that comes over Mr. Sims when he falls asleep.
Enough of your gossip, Rupert. The master needs his amphetamine.
Why, Mrs. Duffy, soon you'll be calling him the savior, I do believe. Since when is Sims referred to as the mask? That term is usually reserved for Henry James or Toscanini. What's he ever done besides turn himself into a Labrador retriever?
What a vicious tongue you've got, Rupert. Now you've let the cat out of the bag. Poor Mr. Flood here. Mr. Flood, I suppose you've heard of the dog people?
No, Mrs. Duffy.
Well, I'd better get him his uppers. And don't you start in about it.
These murders on the moors, Mr. Flood? Now, the townspeople, as you've probably gathered, are a superstitious lot. You see, back in the 14th century, there were instances of a form of lycanthropy on that bypass down by Stonehenge. Well, this was before your time, of course, and my own, too. But so the legend goes. Except, rather than wolves, the local sorcerers were believed to turn into vicious dogs in their sleep. Now, doesn't that sound like a load of compost to you? Science has proven such things don't exist. But Rupert, you know, is trying to get him to have a massive coronary, is my theory. So he'll inherit the liquid assets.
By drawing suspicion onto Mr. Sims? As the author of these strange killings on the Heath?
Well, that would be one way of going about it, I suppose. Oh, and then there's all these other little rumors that Rupert spreads among the village folk. Imagining, I suppose, that they'll descend with torches on the mansion and drive poor Mr. Sims down some well or into a barn like in a horror movie. Well, it's really Rupert who seems a bit animalistic under the circumstances. But then he's been through a lot.
He's your brother, Mrs. Duffy, isn't he?
My God, how on earth did you know?
Well, there's an obvious resemblance. Your coloration, for example.
And here I thought we had you fooled, Mr. Flood. Actually, it's not something we like just everyone to know. You see, he's also my husband.
You mean?
To my eternal shame and regret. Yes, that is what I mean.
Was there a child?
Yes. And no.
That's rather opaque, Mrs. Duffy.
The child was not a real child. It was a strange, horrible thing. We kept it, of course. For a while, anyway. But one morning, Rupert went to look in on the little beast and found the crib empty. The bridge lamp and several Waterford crystal glasses overturned in the nursery, plus a bizarre hexagonal diagram painted in what looked like blood at the time, but on chemical examination turned out to be lead-based paint.
The police! You appeal to the police!
Police have always found this house particularly unappealing, Mr. Flood, but never more so than after the abrupt disappearance of my so-called child.
It's as if this place were accursed!
Want a tea sandwich, Flood?
Just a small one, perhaps, Mrs. Duffy.
Want banana on it? Banana always livens things up a trifle.
No banana for me, thank you.
Suit yourself, Flood.
Well, Flood, still at the old books?
My job, Rupert, believe it or not.
The old man hasn't got you doing anything special, has he?
What do you mean, special?
Oh, nothing. I was just curious.
You certainly are, Rupert. I'd go even further than that in describing you.
Further than curious? How much further would you go?
Quite a bit further than curious. I would say peculiar.
It's Sims that's peculiar, not me. I've never had a peculiar bone in my body.
That's not saying anything. You always think you're saying something, but surprise, you aren't.
Mrs. Duffy,
Yes, Mr. Sims.
how old would you take me for just looking at me now?
Oh, not a day over 50, sir.
You know, sometimes I feel positively ancient. I wonder what that is.
Well, it's because you don't finish your mineral drink. if you finished your mineral drink instead of leaving it on the plate, well, you'd feel as youthful as you look. If you don't mind me saying so.
Sims, that inspector was here sniffing around the other day in case Mrs. Duffy forgot to mention it to you.
Oh, Inspector Bidet?
The very one. He wanted to know all about you.
Oh, all about me? Did he say why?
Seems there have been some more incidents out on the heath.
Rupert, Mr. Sims surely doesn't need to hear another word on that subject.
Maybe you wouldn't mind paying the car bill.
The car bill came? How much is it?
It's 71 pounds and 10, and that's just the beginning.
Have I ever complained about paying the car bill? Not to my own knowledge.
Maybe when you're in one of your spells.
Rupert!
You become forgetful when you're in one of your spells.
What does he do?
Oh, you know Rupert's little fancies, sir. God knows better than I do. I wonder where he gets his notions half the time. Out of books he reads, I suppose.
I've never known Rupert to read a book. He's not of that generation.
To be day, what a surprise! And so soon after the last visit.
I've come across something very interesting.
Interesting? In what way interesting?
This time,
Well, it's my tie. There's nothing interesting about it.
nothing interesting about it, you say? Would you say there just might be something slightly interesting, if not a more so, about the fact that this tie, which you yourself have just admitted to owning, was found no further than 4 paces from the mangled body of the local barmaid out on the heath, not 50 yards from the very place we are standing? Would you characterize that, for example, as not interesting? Would you also say, Mr. Sims, that the presence of the victim's blood on the Christian Dior label of this very tie is not interesting? My God, do you think it's boring?
I said the tie is boring, not what you just said.
I think we'd all agree that what you just said is interesting.
I disagree. I find that boring, too. Why, Fluff, just in time. Inspector Bidet has stumbled upon an interesting discovery. Sims's tie found no more than 4 feet from the mangled body of the local barmaid.
The one with the big tits.
Precisely. She's dead.
Dead. How awful. Let me look in on my treacle muffins.
How appalling, and to think that my tie is somehow mixed up in it makes it even more tragic somehow.
Mangled, you say?
Almost to the point of anonymity.
Oh, the poor thing. I can hardly believe it. I bought a pint from her just yesterday, tipped her half a quid. I suppose I could recover it if she hasn't spent it already.
Oh, such a cheapskate, Rupert, and at such a tragic moment, too.
Money's tight, Sims. Witness the car.
Now, Mrs. Duffy, do get Inspector Bidet a drink. Well, Inspector, I expect you'll be wanting an accounting of where each of us was when the tragic events of last night occurred. I was asleep. Blood?
Notice about the rich, Inspector? Always trying to cast suspicion on the hired help.
And you, Rupert.
Treacle time! Anyone for a muffin?
I swear to God, I know nothing about it.
And you, Flood, were in the guest room.
And I, Flood, was in the guest room.
And were you truly asleep, Sims? Nothing unusual about your sleep? No dreams?
I'm a troubled man, of course. Dreams. The most dreadful kind.
What kind is that?
Bats. Bat wings. Strange noises. Death. Dogs. Vicious dogs. Dogs that are really men and men that are really dogs. Chihuahua men. Tiny things that eat flesh. Insects that suck the blood and lodge beneath the skin. They feed on the very membranes. You see what I mean?
I get the idea, Sims. Do these dreams ever seem as if they were really happening?
What he's asking you realize is when you wake from them, can you tell if you've been dreaming, or do you not know if the dream actually happened?
I know what he meant.
He's just trying to be helpful.
Well, Inspector, we're out of sherry.
That's quite all right, Mrs. Duffy. A gin will be fine. You know, the most peculiar thing about these vicious slayings is the apparent lack of motive. And the smallness of the footprints found. Why, Mrs. Duffy, you dropped your drink.
Are you all right, Mrs. Duffy? Should I call an ambulance?
Rupert, I think she's about to faint.
No. Oh, no. I'm all right. Just something the inspector said reminded me. Or perhaps it was something Mr. Sims said. Reminded me of something I had long forgotten.
A tragic event? Similar to the tragic event of yesterday evening, perhaps?
No, something far worse than even that tragic event is the loss of a child in its first bloom of life.
Mrs. Duffy, don't go overboard. You could hardly call the thing a child without stretching the definition of child to a considerable extent.
I can't fathom your cruelty in uttering such an insensitive remark at this moment, Rupert. After all, it takes two to tango.
I never said I was innocent. Perhaps you were the victim of some unspeakable evil, such as often found in ancient houses of the type we're standing in.
Just what's your drift, Robert? Your drift, Robert.
Inspector Bidet, have you ever heard of the dog people?
Beg your pardon.
The dog people. I guess you can put two and two together, the same as any ordinary man.
Well, I am not one to succumb to superstition on an empty stomach, if that's what you're driving at. I don't imagine anyone who lives in the district hasn't heard something or other about the so-called dog people at one time. Civilization may be declining in the rest of the world, but it has hardly had a chance to catch on hereabouts. And the rest I leave to your imagination.
Sometimes rumors are founded in fact.
Sometimes fact is founded on rumor.
Well, that's about all we have to tell you, Inspector. None of us were on the heath last night. None of us know anything about this recent series of grisly slayings. And none of us would give you the time of day if you hadn't stumbled in here with that tie in your hand. I guess that about sums it up from our point of view.
I agree with Rupert here, Inspector. You can't just come in accusing people of leaving their ties draped over the bodies of slaughtered barmaids without once raising an allegation.
I was getting to that. I hate to spoil your afternoon for you, so I was being polite. You, Sims, an elderly man who has difficulty sleeping, and you, Rupert, a hostile young fixture of the household, Flood, an outsider about whom little is known. And last but not least, our own Mrs. Duffy, the faithful family retainer. The picture of slightly compromised innocence, wouldn't you say? And yet it seems to me that even within this tedious family portrait, there is, if you'll pardon a poetic expression, the odor of evil. There was Reginald Von Sims, for example, who murdered at least 100 children on the heath. Some say he was the victim of an uncontrollable mania. Something, with your permission, in his blood that compelled him to commit his lurid atrocities.
Oh, my goodness, Inspector Bidet, we are becoming vehement.
I haven't finished, Mrs. Duffy. What about that strange baby you gave birth to some years ago, which disappeared from its nursery just a few weeks after birth, no trace of which was ever found, and whose physical description was described by your own physician as an affront to the concept of humanity?
Well, I'm sure Dr. Harrow had his reasons for such a slander, Inspector. But his own description does not entirely tally with my own. Of course, that's a mother talking.
And you, Rupert, what have you got to say for yourself after sponsoring such a monstrous infant in a moment of thoughtless incest?
I do not care to answer these snide, pointed remarks. If you have come to arrest me, make your intentions known, because I have plans for you.
What plans, Rupert?
Planning a little nap, perhaps? A few wild hours in the arms of Morpheus? Planning to let your hair down, for example?
Plans, Rupert? What sort of plans?
You're all so bloody interested to know what my plans are. You've completely forgotten Sims over there, calm as can be, with the evidence of his necktie hanging limply in your very hand, Inspector.
A tie is an easy enough thing to remove from a gentleman's wardrobe.
Almost anyone could steal such a tie and place it in there where it was found to be seized upon as evidence.
You, for example, Flood, you could have easily stolen such a tie if you were a thief. But we know better, since this series of grisly crimes preceded your arrival by several months. A man as amply endowed as yourself would have been noticed lurking about these parts almost instantaneously, and no one seems to have laid eyes on you until about 4 days ago, which leaves the old standbys, Mrs. Duffy, Sims here, and Rupert over there.
And yourself, Inspector. What makes you so lily white that you can stand here and call the kettle black?
In a case like this, no one is above suspicion, of course. But if I were the guilty party, I would come forward, unlike others.
Even if you were unaware that you yourself had committed the crime?
You've got me there, Rupert. Whew, how did you contrive such a puzzle? I would have to possess, I suppose, a split personality for that to be the case.
You dismiss that idea as nonsensical or ludicrous?
I did no such thing. But if I am a schizo...
Ready?
I'm hardly qualified to deny it.
Hear that? What? Out there?
Fun. It is after tea time by the looks of things. I'll just clear off these glasses, Inspector.
I'd better get back to work.
Well, double indemnity on this side of things as well, Inspector. Unless that tie is somehow more provocative than you so far demonstrated. I clear up.
And, you,
I did have plans, but I could cancel them if this is what you have in mind, Inspector. But tell me something.
We can get on with it then. The transformation.
And then what?
Didn't Flood tell you?
No, Flood's been very reticent with me since he got here, even though he is one of us.
What about Mrs. Duffy?
Oh, she's been ready for hours. Just polishing up some glasses, I suppose.
There's a new girl down at the hall.
Oh, yeah. What's her name?
Madeleine. Pretty name. Like child.
Yeah, it is. Like child. Does she have the bloom of youth?
Luminous is some flame beneath the sea. Trust me, Rupert.
Oh, I do, Sims.
of Sims Bill Rice. In the part of Flood, Evan Lurie. In the part of Rupert, Larry Mitchell.
Okay, Rick.
In the part of Mrs. Duffy, Suzanne Fletcher. And in the part of Inspector Bidet, Harvey Perr.